episode of the C-Suite Edge. I'm your host, John Light. I'm also the president and founder of Sabretooth Recruiting. And today, I'm very fortunate. I got lucky, actually, I think, with Adriana Cowdin joining me. Adriana, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel like I'm the fortunate one, John.
Well, you and I have talked before, and we've had a couple of engaging conversations. I know we recorded a longer format podcast a year or so ago, but I wanted to have you back on because I look around the job market today, and I'm not just talking about, at all levels, but especially for upper management, mid-level management, and up into the C-suite. This has been a really challenging couple of years. I mean, there's been mass layoffs and there's been all of this, but I know a big part of what you do, and I'm sure you're going to phrase it differently. I'm sure you're going to phrase it more efficiently than me. But a big part of what you do is help give people, executives and mid-level folks, I think, strategies and tactics to give them hope in the job market, to encourage them and give them something to build on. So could you just kind of give us a 90-second overview of you and Be Bold and what your mission is?
Yeah, so I always say I empower executives and entrepreneurs to navigate change with clarity and confidence. And so those changes are different inflection points, right? Whether I'm what I call a lady who launches, an entrepreneur woman, or whether I'm a senior executive looking for, the back nine of my career, is that going to be board roles, or is that going to be philanthropy or consulting or fractional work? Or if I'm just looking to make a change in the marketplace, right? That's who I work with. And I work with them at those inflection points to really look at how do I do this in a confident and authentic way, and also get super clear on what my goal is so that they accomplish that goal.
Well, I tell you what, it's tough in a job search, and especially if you haven't been in the market a while, to get that clarity. And you've heard me talk, and I throw out a lot of colloquialisms because I'm from Texas and we're allowed to do that. I mean, we combine words all the time and come up with new stuff, but a lot of times executives, professionals don't really define and have clarity on where they hang their hat.
Yeah.
And I find that to be a real challenge because you got to know who and what you're about and are and can do. But why don't we start with this as our inflection for this conversation? Looking around the universe of things that you deal with, what's the biggest problem you can help people solve?
I think the biggest challenge I can help them solve is burnout. So a lot of times, someone hasn't looked for a job for 30 years, right? Or 20 years. They've had a very nice, successful, natural career progression. And now kids are in high school, maybe going off to college. My kid is graduating with any luck from college, and the tuition bills will stop. And it's starting to have that point of I'm starting to lose some of my energy. I want to do something that is more mission or purpose-based, and I want to integrate my whole life, right? There's been this push for the career success, and now it's more about what legacy am I living? What am I leaving behind? Am I making the world a better place? And oftentimes we get burnt out in our career. And so this inflection point comes of, I feel burnt out, but I still want to be doing something. What does that look like? And oh, by the way, most of the times I'm still the breadwinner. So whatever I'm doing has to still make good money.
Right.
And how do you kind of integrate a personal brand that is authentic to you and that fuels you so that whatever you do personally and professionally gives you energy instead of draining you? And sometimes that's being empowered. Sometimes it's being more vulnerable. Sometimes it's just defining really clearly what that goal is and branding yourself in that way. But a lot of it leads to, how do I address burnout and how do I connect with my authentic self to move to the next stage in my career?
So that brings to mind a question from my perspective, because from a business perspective, if we go about, hey, let's focus on our company brand.
Yeah.
That's a process a lot of people go through. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of upper and mid-level management, how do we define ourselves? How do we want to be perceived? And I wonder if we could just take and kind of, I don't know that you'd necessarily, I guess you wouldn't miniaturize it in a sense, but encapsulate it maybe for a person who's hitting the job market. before they start looking and applying for jobs, but actually taking the time to define, here's what I'm really good at. Here's where I hang my hat. Here's the impact I've had. Here's the impact I can have on whatever the next step is, the next company, the next team, the whatever. I wonder sometimes if, and I know it's not always possible because you can lose a job or a career can fold, an industry can shrink at very inopportune times in someone's life.
Yeah.
How do you navigate crossing that bridge first rather than let me just go attack the market?
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, you have to remember that 80% of jobs are landed through networking. And when you go higher up into the senior echelons, it's 90%. So I always say, focus your energy on where you're going to get the results. Just building a resume and applying online, that's 10% of the market. So focus 10% of your energy on that, right? Sometimes we need to do things to feel like we're moving forward, and that's okay. But when it comes to branding yourself, it's not just what you've done or the results you've gotten. It's how you got them and who you are. That's what makes you different. That's how you define your personal brand, right? In my case, I can say I'm an executive coach. I work with senior executives and entrepreneurs. Well, there's a lot of people that could say that. It's how I work with you. It's the type of work I do, and it's the credibility and expertise I bring that makes me different. That's why I have a very clear brand. If you look at a company like a Spanx, right? Founded by Sarah Blakely. She is as much that brand as the word Spanx, and she is very authentic and personable, and so is the brand. So whoever you are has to weave into whatever personal brand you put out there. That's why someone hires you. People hire people. They don't hire paper. They're not hiring your resume, they're hiring you. And you need to be memorable in a positive way. And that comes from not just what you do, but again, the how you do it and who you are when you are doing those things, whether it's driving a company forward as the CEO or as a marketing director or an operations leader. How you do it and who you are paramount.
Yeah, and I think I've shared this with you before, but it's been a long time. You go to a B school, you get your MBA and whatnot, and you hear some pretty drawn out and fancy explanations or definitions of corporate culture. And years ago, I just started saying culture is real simple. Culture is how we get stuff done.
Yeah.
And how a company or a team gets stuff done, it has to align with how you get stuff done. Otherwise, you're putting energy into fitting in rather than execution, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And it's one of the more challenging aspects, I think, because the how we get stuff done, I think, reflects our approach to a lot of things. How we prepare when you were in high school and you were going to play a football game, basketball game, volleyball match, tennis match, whatever it would be, how you prepare and how you play is a reflection of how you get stuff done. How you solve problems in your career that you find or are assigned to you to fix, to resolve, tells people a lot about you as an individual.
Yes.
And I find it fascinating because the spectrum of how stuff gets done is vast from end to end. And I'm curious to know, when you sit down and have a conversation with someone and you want to define that aspect of their career, of their persona, what, in a nutshell, what's the kind of pathway you would take to figure that out, to help them understand it from an authentic standpoint and be able to live it and communicate it?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, I want to pivot back to something you said, which is you don't want to be trying to fit in somewhere, right? When it comes to culture. And you know this from your work, John, 89% of the time when it doesn't work out, it's a cultural mismatch. It's not a functional or technical expertise, right? And so when you spend the time to brand yourself and talk about who you are and how you do things, you don't end up, hopefully, in those situations, or at least much less frequently.
Right.
So I just wanted to talk about that for a second. But when it comes to figuring out kind of what your personal brand is, I love one of the other things you said, which you can use all these big B word phrases and terms, or my grandfather used to call 25-cent words, which probably now would be like $20 words or $100 words. But I like to say use simple language, right? Use language that if you were to walk into a freshman day one class at a new university and say, "Hi, my name's Adriana," and then give your personal brand, they would understand enough to ask the question, "What does that mean?" Or "Tell me more," or "How do you do that?" The whole point of your personal brand is to be able to answer the question, "What do you do?" So you don't respond with, "I'm an executive coach," because that doesn't tell you anything about me. You respond with, "I empower executive and entrepreneurs to navigate change with clarity and confidence." Great. Well, what does that actually mean? Or how do you do that? Or what kind of executives? The only reason you have a personal brand is to spark a conversation that will lead to a natural relationship, and that networking leads to a new job. So to define that, you have to know who you are. You have to know how you get things done. And sometimes assessments can be really, really helpful. We work with Trimetrics EQ assessment through TTI Success Insights. There are tons of them, DISC and Clifton Strengths. There's all kinds of them. But it can be hard to define your own strengths and weaknesses. So sometimes when you take an assessment, that can help you get there. And then work with someone who really does know their stuff in personal branding, because it's not just an investment in looking for your job. It's an investment in how you become a thought leader and attract future opportunities.
Yeah, no, excellent, excellent. Appreciate that answer a lot.
Yeah.
You know, because if you communicate in something that's unfamiliar and not in layperson terminology, you
Right.
run the risk of losing your audience. And if you want to promote your brand, if you want to network, you cannot lose your audience. You've got to connect with them. You've got to resonate. Speaking of that, speaking of authenticity, here's a biggie that I've heard asked over and over again in public forums and private conversation. What's the impact of AI today
Yeah.
on not just executive coaching, but helping individuals be more authentic? Because if someone's using generative AI to write a resume, which for people listening at home, I do not approve of. There's a lot of risk involved in that. You know, you've got to have it tightly controlled. And if you're not going to do that and be disciplined, don't do it.
Yeah.
But how is it impacting what you do and how you interact with your clients and help them?
Yeah, I love this question. So I am a huge fan of innovation. I try to stay on what I call the bleeding edge of things. And so I use AI every day, most of the day. But I use it, what I like to say, with my brain on top of it. So
That's a good description.
I might use it in the business to map out a content strategy. But I don't just download that content strategy and then upload that stuff to Instagram or somewhere, right? I read it, I use my brain, I adjust it, I use my tone. I also train AI. These tools can be trained in your voice, your personality, whatever you're using AI for. I don't care if it's to help you write a cover letter, which is a good use of it, not a resume, but a cover letter.
Yeah.
Or if it's to give you some ideas on how to answer interview questions. You have to overlay the fact that you are smarter than the technology. It may have access to a lot more resources faster, but you are the brain. And so your personality has to weave into that, and you have to use your human knowledge to refine whatever the output is, right? So yes, use it to amplify what you are doing on your own, to extend your capacity, or to, clarify something for you. But relying on anything 100% is just a bad idea, in my mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, if you're truly going to be authentic, then you need to make your own judgment calls.
That's right.
And it needs to not only speak in your voice, it needs to be your voice. And they're coming out with technology now. I think Amazon is using it when it comes to books that are getting published. And if they're detecting more than a certain percentage of what they consider to be AI-generated content, they toss it.
Yeah,
or flag it.
There's I am often in media, featured in media. So I was just featured in a Newsweek article about the changing economy and how it's impacting the market. Anytime I respond to a media feature, it automatically goes through an AI checker.
Yep.
Because anyone could pop into Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT and say, hey, how's the market if I'm searching for a job based on government change, and come up with some answer, right? It doesn't mean it's an expert's answer. So they AI check everything. And if I'm out there using AI as a candidate or a leader or anything, you better expect that it's being checked on the other side, wherever you're sending it in. You send in a resume, you can expect it's being checked for AI tools.
Yeah, no, you got to be smart. That doesn't mean you got to cheat. You need to be you.
That's right.
That's one of the hard. That's a hard thing sometimes.
It is, and they see there are a lot of interviews now that are video interviews where they're making people turn around their screens so they can show that they're not using AI to answer the questions.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know that I ever do that, but I sure think there's a lot of value in the human connection and meeting face to face, and properly setting expectations.
I could not agree with you more. I think it's difficult because we're in an environment, especially post-COVID, especially with younger generations, and nothing against the younger generations, but they're very used to doing everything behind a screen. Everything from how they communicate with their friends and family is behind a screen, whether that's a phone and a text or a Slack or whatever. And so this human connection and one-to-one communication and meeting in person has become secondary to some sort of electronic communication or electronic interaction. And I feel like that's a real disservice to the generations that didn't have the benefit of, the water cooler talks or the hallway meetings and building those relationships with colleagues in person. It's just not the same.
Yeah. And there'll be a reckoning for it, but I think that just enables us to capture more business too, because a lot of people want to help.
I agree.
Adriana, thanks so much for joining me. I have one last question. If someone wants to get in touch with you and have a conversation about being bolder, about being authentic, about solving burnout issues and really getting their career on track or their scaling on track if they're an entrepreneur, what's the best way for folks to find you?
You can go to LinkedIn and look for Adriana L. Cowdin. Thankfully, there's only one of me. And you'll know it's me because it's got my face and my signature up at top. So you can find me on LinkedIn under Adriana L. Cowdin, or you can go to BeBoldExecutiveCoaching.com.
Be Bold Executive Coaching. And Adriana, I've heard no one, and I doubt anyone would ever accuse you of not being bold.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your stance. I appreciate your perspective and what you do for folks. And hopefully we'll be able to record another episode sometime in the future. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much